I never imagined my own daughter, Clara, would shove me so violently in my own living room just because I dared to object to her demanding Evelyn's apartment. What she didn't know was that very night, Evelyn sent me proof of a $20 inheritance scam and an immediate plan to sell the apartment. My own bias had blinded me. If you're watching this video, tell me where you're from or what time it is for you. I can no longer pinpoint the exact moment when the blind favoritism that Sarah and I showed toward Clara stopped being a passing weakness and became a permanent condition in our family's bloodstream. Maybe it began quietly, almost invisibly, on the day the twins were born. Parenthood felt like a storm that never ended, and the exhaustion of raising two babies at once somehow distorted the way we looked at them. Clara was the smaller one, the weaker one, the one who cried more at night and needed to be held longer before she fell asleep. That helplessness made us protective, too protective. From that seed grew a subtle but relentless habit of pity, and that pity, over the years, hardened into bias. We never pitied Evelyn. She was the firstborn, the confident one, the child who tied her own shoelaces before anyone taught her how. By the time she was 25, she had built a career as an interior designer with a rising reputation, and later, she bought her own modern apartment in the Pearl District, a space filled with light, clean lines, and the quiet assurance of someone who didn't owe anyone anything. Evelyn didn't need help. She didn't ask for it, either. That independence, something any parent should have admired, became, in our flawed minds, an excuse to withhold affection. We mistook self-sufficiency for emotional distance. We told ourselves she was fine, always fine, and so we poured our attention into the daughter who wasn't. Clara was a perpetual storm of tears and promises. Her voice on the phone always carried a trembling urgency. Credit card bills she couldn't pay, business opportunities that collapsed in days, relationships that left her adrift. Saving Clara became our project, our moral duty, our twisted proof of love. Looking back, I see the sickness in it now. We equated care with rescue, and because Clara always needed rescuing, she became the gravitational center of our emotional lives. In the logic of fools, the child who suffered more deserved more. The child who succeeded deserved less. And so, over 20 years, our affection became a crooked ledger. Evelyn was written in ink, Clara in fire. The final crack appeared the year Clara's debts spiraled beyond repair, $50,000, maybe more. The numbers blurred together. Overdue payments, interest, collectors' calls. Sarah and I stayed up one night at the kitchen table, the house wrapped in silence except for the sound of the refrigerator hum. We convinced ourselves we were making a practical decision, but in truth, we were surrendering to the same old pattern of indulgence. Evelyn has her apartment, Sarah whispered. She's stable. She'll understand. Understand. Such a foolish word. On Friday, I called Evelyn. I told her we needed to have a family meeting. Mandatory, Sunday afternoon, at her apartment. She hesitated for half a second before saying yes. Maybe she already sensed the shape of what was coming. When we arrived that Sunday, the first thing I noticed was the air. How clean it smelled. How still everything was. Evelyn's apartment had that quiet order that only comes from discipline. No clutter, no chaos, just calm surfaces and deliberate beauty. Clara stood near the window, arms folded, her face wearing a smug confidence that made something twist inside me. She thought the matter was already settled. I tried to ignore it. I cleared my throat and began with what I thought was authority. Evelyn, I said, my voice rehearsed but unsteady, your mother and I have been thinking about Clara and the children. They need stability. They need a home. We've decided that the best way forward is for you to let Clara have this apartment. Temporarily, of course, until she gets back on her feet." Evelyn didn't move. Her expression didn't change. She just looked at me, steady, unreadable, like someone listening to a language she didn't recognize. "Dad," she said quietly, "could you repeat that?" "You heard me," I replied, irritation creeping in to mask my shame. "Clara needs this place more than you do right now. You've done well for yourself, but you don't have children. You can find another place. Don't be selfish." Sarah nodded faintly beside me, her hands clasped tight in her lap. Clara's lips curled into a smile of triumph. Evelyn's eyes flickered, not with tears, but with something colder, something final. "So," she said, "because I built something with my own hands, I'm being punished for it." "That's not what I said," I protested, though a part of me knew it was exactly what I meant. "You're missing the bigger picture. Your sister is drowning." Evelyn took a deep breath. "And whose fault is that?" The silence after that question was unbearable. I wanted to speak, but Clara exploded first. "Dad's right," she snapped. "You've always thought you were better than me? You could at least help for once in your life." Before I could react, Clara stepped forward. Her hand came out, a shove, sharp and sudden. My balance went. The floor rose up. For a second, all I saw was the gleam of Evelyn's hardwood before my body hit it with a dull thud. The world froze. Sarah gasped. Clara's breath came in short, angry bursts. I pushed myself up, slow and trembling, brushing the dust from my trousers. My knee hurt, but not as much as the humiliation burning in my chest. Evelyn didn't rush to help me. She didn't even move. She stood a few feet away, her eyes hollow and glacial. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, too calm. "I'll think about your request, Dad," she said. "But I want you to understand something. Today, you crossed a line that no father should ever cross. You looked at the child who built something on her own and decided it belonged to the one who broke everything she touched. You made a judgment about worth, and you'll never be able to take it back." She turned toward the door, her movements slow, deliberate. "Please leave," she said. And that was it. No shouting, no slammed doors, just a quiet command that felt like exile. Sarah reached for Evelyn's arm, but Evelyn stepped back, her face expressionless. Clara muttered something, defensive, half-hearted, but even she seemed to realize the gravity of what had just happened. We walked out into the hallway, the soft click of the closing door echoing like a verdict. Outside, the afternoon sun was too bright, too indifferent. Sarah cried in the car. I drove in silence, my hands trembling on the wheel. I told myself I had done the right thing, a father protecting his weaker child. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had destroyed something sacred. That night, the house felt hollow. The walls seemed to listen. Sarah didn't speak to me for hours. When she finally did, her voice was small, almost frightened. "She won't forgive us," she said. "She will." I lied. "She's strong. She'll understand." But Evelyn did not call. Not that night. Not the next day. Not for weeks. And when the silence finally became unbearable, I drove past her building in the Pearl District, just to see the light in her windows. There was none. The curtains were drawn. Months later, we learned that Evelyn had sold the apartment. She moved to another city, Portland, maybe Seattle. No one knew for sure. She didn't leave a forwarding address. Clara, meanwhile, burned through every dollar we gave her. The stability we had sacrificed everything for lasted less than a year. I sometimes wake in the middle of the night and see the moment replayed. Clara's shove, Evelyn's eyes, that frozen instant when all my excuses collapsed. I used to think love was measured by what we gave. Now I know it's measured by what we respect. I disrespected my eldest daughter in the name of love for the younger, and in doing so, I lost them both. If there is a moral to this story, I don't deserve to tell it. But perhaps it's this: fairness isn't natural. It's a discipline, a choice we must make again and again, especially when it hurts. I failed to make that choice, and the cost was my family's quiet collapse. Sometimes I drive through the Pearl District, just to see the building again. I stand across the street and stare at the window that used to glow with her warm light. I imagine Evelyn inside, sketching her designs, humming faintly, her mind at peace. But then I remember her last words, the calm, surgical precision of them. And I know she isn't there. Not really. She's somewhere else, building a new life, one that doesn't include the people who treated her strength as a crime. The apartment, the shove, the silence. They come back to me like ghosts. And every time I remember, I understand a little more about what love isn't. Love isn't rescue. Love isn't control. Love, real love, is respect. And respect was the one thing I never gave to the daughter who least needed saving. I left Evelyn's apartment that afternoon believing, somehow, that I had won a small victory. I told myself I had done the responsible thing, a father restoring balance, a man preserving family stability. But that illusion didn't even last the day. Only a few hours later, as the evening light faded and Sarah was quietly setting the table for dinner, my phone chimed with a new email. The sender was a name I didn't recognize. Marcus Reed, attorney at law, and the subject line was colder than ice. Clara, due diligence. At first, I thought it was some sort of mistake, but when I opened the attached PDF, I realized I was staring into a mirror held up to every delusion I had ever protected. The document was 43 pages long, each page dismantled, with surgical precision, everything Sarah and I had believed about our youngest daughter. The first section was titled Debt Composition. It explained, in calm legal language, that the so-called $50,000 consumer debt Clara had claimed wasn't consumer debt at all. It was a network of high-interest personal loans connected to a failing online boutique, registered under her name, an empty storefront, a digital illusion designed to hide gambling losses. The company's bank statements, attached in the appendix, showed payments not to suppliers or shippers, but to offshore betting platforms, casino apps, and private lenders known for predatory practices. As I scrolled further, the report grew darker. There were emails between Clara and a real estate agent, dated only a week before our family meeting. Clara hadn't asked about moving in. She wasn't looking for a place to live with her children. She was asking about liquidation strategy. "I'll need to convert to cash as fast as possible." One of her messages read, "Sentimental value, 0. How soon after transfer can we list it?" I stopped breathing for a moment. My vision tunneled. The implication was immediate and brutal. Clara didn't need Evelyn's apartment for the children's stability. She needed it to sell, fast, to pay off her gambling debts. Evelyn would be left homeless, and the so-called grandchildren's safety we had used to justify everything was nothing but a bargaining chip in a con. I had not just been deceived. I had been weaponized. I was the fool who had loaded a gun and handed it to the thief. For a long while, I just sat there, staring at the screen, trying to breathe through the noise in my head. My reflection in the glass of the tablet looked like a stranger, gray, hollow, ashamed. Every justification I had whispered to myself over the years, Clara is fragile, Clara needs us, Evelyn will understand, collapsed into dust. Then I reached the final section. It was titled, Inheritance Discrepancies. I didn't want to read it. Some instinct told me that if I did, there would be no way back. But I did. Of course, I did. It contained records from my late mother's trust fund, documents Sarah and I had never bothered to verify because we trusted our daughter. According to Clara, 5 years ago she had been the sole beneficiary of the $40 Sonal trust. I remember her crying in the kitchen, telling us the lawyer said Grandma had left everything to her because Evelyn didn't need it. We believed her. We never asked for paperwork. But Marcus Reed's report included the truth. Evelyn had been a co-beneficiary. $20,000, half of the total, had been meant for her. Clara had forged her sister's digital signature on the release forms, pocketed the entire sum, and spent it within months. The bank transfers were right there, traced, time-stamped, and undeniable. The tablet slipped from my hands and hit the floor with a dull crack. For a few seconds, I could hear nothing. Not the refrigerator hum, not the faint sound of the TV in the next room, not even my own breathing. There was only the sound of my pulse hammering against the inside of my skull. The cold dread in my chest shifted, burning into something uglier, shame. A shame so deep it made me tremble. It wasn't just about the apartment. It wasn't even about the inheritance. It was the realization that this had been going on for years, a pattern of deception that Sarah and I had fed with our own hands. We had built the stage, handed Clara the script, and applauded every performance of her helplessness. Sarah came into the room, still wearing her apron. "What is it, Robert?" she asked softly. I couldn't speak. I only pointed to the tablet on the floor. She bent down, picked it up, and began to read. At first, her face was expressionless. Then, as her eyes moved down the page, to the emails, the forged inheritance forms, the transaction history, her color drained away. When she reached the line that read, "Funds diverted from joint trust account, 2018, she sank to her knees. "Robert," she whispered, her voice breaking. "The inheritance money. She lied to us." I knelt beside her, and for a long moment we just stayed there. Two aging parents, surrounded by the quiet wreckage of our own blindness. That night, neither of us slept. We sat at the kitchen table, the report spread out in front of us, the air heavy with disbelief. Every hour brought a new wave of memory. Moments we had dismissed, inconsistencies we had ignored, times Evelyn had tried to warn us and we had silenced her. Sarah kept whispering the same sentence under her breath, like a prayer she couldn't stop repeating. How could she do this to us? I didn't have an answer, because deep down, I knew we had done it to ourselves. Around midnight, I began to write down everything I remembered about Clara's financial crises, the sudden phone calls, the stories that never quite made sense, the disappearances. When I looked at the list, it stretched back almost 15 years. 15 years of rescues, lies, and forgiveness. At 2 a.m, Sarah finally spoke again. Her voice was different, soft, but edged with something that hadn't been there before. "We turned Evelyn into the villain," she said, "and Clara into a victim, but it was the other way around all along." I looked at her and saw what the report had done. Not just to our faith, but to our marriage, our idea of who we were. "We didn't raise a monster," I said quietly. "We raised a mirror." Sarah didn't reply. She just looked at the tablet screen, its cold light flickering over her face, and whispered, "I want to call Evelyn. Right now." But I couldn't let her. I couldn't bear the thought of hearing Evelyn's voice. The daughter I had humiliated, the one I had accused of selfishness, the one I had betrayed in front of her sister. The thought of that conversation terrified me more than Clara's deceit. Evelyn's anger wouldn't be loud. It would be quiet, calm, final, the kind of justice that doesn't shout, only withdraws. And so we sat there in silence until dawn. When the first light came through the curtains, Sarah reached for my hand. Her palm was trembling. "What do we do now?" she asked. I stared at the papers. I thought about Evelyn's apartment, about Clara's forged inheritance, about the years of manipulation that had turned love into currency. "We do the one thing we should have done 20 years ago," I said. "We tell the truth." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure I had the courage to follow through, because the truth, once spoken, would destroy what little remained of our family. And yet, perhaps it was already gone. That afternoon, I drove to Marcus Reed's office. He was younger than I expected, sharp-eyed, precise, the kind of man who wastes no words. He told me he had been hired by Evelyn, not out of vengeance, but necessity. She had commissioned the report to protect herself legally in case Clara or I attempted to force a transfer of property. "She anticipated your move," he said quietly. "She didn't want to fight you, Mr. Hale. She just wanted evidence, something that would speak when she couldn't." I felt the blood drain from my face. Evelyn hadn't raised her voice, hadn't pleaded, hadn't tried to convince me. She had simply prepared the truth, calmly, methodically, and let it arrive when it needed to. That, I realized, was what real strength looked like. Not confrontation, not fury, but precision, restraint, and justice. When I left the law office, the city felt colder, emptier. I sat in the car for a long time, staring at my trembling hands on the steering wheel. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a father. I felt like a man standing before the ruins of his own creation. That night, Sarah and I didn't speak much. The house seemed to echo with silence. Every familiar object, a framed photo, a coffee mug, a coat on the chair, felt tainted by the memory of the daughter we had chosen over the one who deserved better. I understood, finally, that Evelyn didn't need our apology. What she needed was distance, and what Clara needed was consequence. But there was one more truth that haunted me long after the lights went out. We had spent decades teaching Clara that love was something you could buy, negotiate, or manipulate, and she had learned that lesson perfectly. We hadn't raised a gambler. We had raised an investor in pity, one who knew exactly how to trade on her parents' guilt until there was nothing left to give. I did not wait for sleep that night, and Evelyn did not wait for our apology. She moved first, as if the past 20 years had been a long corridor, and she already knew where every door opened. In the morning, before the kettle finished boiling, my phone lit up with an unknown number. I answered on the second ring. "Mr. Vance," a crisp voice said. "This is Marcus Reed. I'm calling to inform you that my client, Ms. Evelyn Vance, has executed a legal instrument transferring title of the apartment at 420 Pearl Heights into an irrevocable trust." He spoke plainly, without drama, the way a surgeon might describe removing a tumor. "In legal terms," he continued, "the apartment is now a fortress. It is not a personal asset that can be casually conveyed or pressured out of her control. The trust instrument includes spendthrift provisions and independent trusteeship. Any transfer would require conditions that cannot be met by family request. Fortress. The word settled on the kitchen like frost. I thanked him, though I didn't know for what. After we ended the call, I stared at the window above the sink. It reflected a man I barely recognized, jaw tight, eyes rimmed in red, a father studying the limits of his power. In that reflection, I could almost hear the message Evelyn had sent through the attorney. Your authority stops at my doorstep. I have protected what is mine. From you. Sarah had been listening in the hallway. She stepped into the light and sat at the table without a sound. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. The kettle clicked off. The air smelled faintly of metal and tea. Finally, she said, "We have to face Clara." We drove to Clara's rental on Riverton, the one with the leaning mailbox and the blinds always half closed at odd angles. Clara opened the door with a bright, performative smile that never reached her eyes. She was ready to celebrate. In her mind, the transfer was a done thing, and we were there to finalize the pleasant details. Timelines, movers, perhaps an advance for new furnishings. She gave Sarah a quick hug and aimed another at me. I stepped past it. "Let's sit," I said. We took the couch. Clara perched on the armchair like a host about to reveal a cake. I could not look at her. I stared at my hands until the skin felt foreign, then lifted my eyes and began with the simplest truth I could say without breaking. "Clara," I said slowly, "we've read the report." The smile collapsed, first at the corners, then all at once. A flicker of calculation crossed her face, the kind of lightning you see over distant hills, there and gone. Then came the performance, the widening eyes, the hand to the chest, the breath pulled in so the ribs showed. "Dad, that's not true," she said, her voice pitched high with practiced hurt. "And Evelyn is turning you against me. She always has." "Stop," I said, and the word cracked in the middle. My voice came back rough and low. "Do not insult our intelligence again." Silence. Even the refrigerator in the little kitchen paused. "We know," I continued, "about the 50,000 in loans. We know they weren't consumer debts. We know what they funded. We know about the emails to the real estate agent and your plan to list the apartment as soon as you had title." I saw her mouth open and lift a denial. I raised my hand. "And we know about the inheritance." Sarah's voice trembled into the room like a thread. "Clara," she asked, "the $20,000 Grandma left your sister, where is it?" Something in Clara broke then, but not the part we had hoped would break. What cracked was the mask of sweetness. What emerged was not a confession, not remorse, but rage, the tight, childish fury of someone who fears the well has gone dry. "So now you're listening to that?" She searched for a word sharp enough and found it. "That selfish architect who has everything, everything." She leaned forward, eyes glassy with contempt. "You always said family helps family. I need it more. Evelyn doesn't. What has she ever given up for us? She chooses herself every time." The room shrank. Sarah flinched as if the words were thrown. I felt an old instinct rise up, the urge to negotiate, to soothe, to pay the ransom that would buy us one more month of peace. But the instinct passed through me and died. There was nothing left to buy and nothing left to sell. "Clara," I said, and the name felt heavy. "The era of rescue is over." She blinked twice. The fury twisted, searching for a target that would bleed. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said, We are ending all financial support. Not next month. Now. No more transfers. No new credit lines. No temporary loans. It is over. Immediately and permanently. I paused, letting the words take their shape. The apartment is beyond reach. It's in a trust. You cannot touch it. You will need to make your own arrangements. Clara's face turned pale, then blotched red, then pale again. She laughed, a hard, unfamiliar sound. Then you aren't my parents anymore. She spat. You never were. You're Evelyn's parents. You always have been. She stood. We didn't. After a long, quiet minute, Sarah rose and opened her purse. She seemed about to take out her wallet, then closed it and set the purse back down. The motion brought tears to her eyes. "Oh, we love you," she said, her voice breaking on the word. "But we won't pay for your harm anymore." Clara stared at us with a hate that looked like grief and said nothing more. 2 days later, Evelyn agreed to meet us in a neutral place. A small cafe on Alder with pale wood tables and the low hum of people who had never raised their voices in public. We arrived early and rehearsed our apology in whispers. But when Evelyn walked in, calm and composed, I understood that whatever speech I had thought might matter was already too late. She greeted the barista by name, ordered tea, and sat across from us with a posture I recognized from old photographs. The straight back of a girl who learned long ago to carry her own weight. "I'm sorry," I began. The words felt thin and breakable. "I'm sorry for the apartment. I'm sorry for believing—" I exhaled. "For believing you would give up what you built, because we asked." Evelyn listened without interrupting. She placed her cup on the saucer with careful precision, as if she understood porcelain better than she understood her parents. "Thank you for the acknowledgement, Dad," she said when I finished. Then she turned to Sarah. "And thank you, Mom." Sarah reached across the table, but Evelyn did not take her hand. Not out of cruelty, out of clarity. "There isn't anything to apologize for, really," she said, and the gentleness in her voice made the words heavier, not lighter. "You acted consistently with your beliefs. You believed I was self-sufficient, and that Clara needed support. So you gave her what she demanded and assumed I could absorb the cost. I acted consistently with that same belief, that I am self-sufficient, by using my own resources and counsel to protect what is mine. The trust," she added, "isn't an act of aggression. It's the final act of independence." "Evelyn," I said, feeling the plea rise in me like a tide. "We're still a family. She's still your sister. We are still your parents. Don't throw all of us away." Evelyn watched me for a moment with those steady eyes that never scattered. When she spoke, the words had sorrow folded into them, but not softness. "Family," she said, "was discarded 5 years ago." The cafe seemed to lean closer to listen. She continued, voice even, gaze unwavering. "I didn't leave a loving home," she said. "I left a transaction, a structure where my money was welcome, but my presence was conditional. Conditional on sacrifice without limit, and silence without end. You did not ask me to belong. You asked me to supply." The sentence landed like a verdict, measured, reasoned, irrevocable. She reached into her wallet and took out a bill, folded small and precise. She placed it next to her cup, a 20. It rested there like a token from a language we no longer spoke. "I wish you both well," she said, and there was no sarcasm in it. "Take care of yourselves." Then she rose. That was all. No embrace. No scene. The bell over the door gave a small, domestic chime as she stepped out into the daylight. We watched her cross the street and dissolve into the slow Sunday flow of people who had places to be. Sarah's shoulders shook. I stared at the $20 bill. It was so little and somehow so vast. The last payment in a ledger we had written against our own child's dignity. We stayed until the tea went cold. When we finally stood, I felt older by years I could not name. In the days that followed, the trust papers arrived by registered mail. Marcus included a cover letter with polite finality. All future communications regarding the apartment were to be addressed to the trustees. There was nothing for us to sign, nothing to contest, nothing to manipulate. The arrangement contained its own weather. Clear skies, high walls, no storms allowed. We also received a brief email from Clara. A single paragraph of accusation and farewell, ending with a promise to make it without you like I always had to. I read it twice and then archived it. There was nothing in it that time had not already said for her. At home, the rooms felt rearranged, though nothing had moved. The photographs on the mantel acquired a new grammar. Evelyn's graduation, Clara's 7th birthday, the four of us on a beach where the wind had blown our hair into our eyes. Each image now carried a margin note. Here is where you misunderstood. Here is where you looked away. Here is where a small decision became a pillar. Sarah and I began the work no one teaches you to do, the work of unlearning the crooked habits you mistook for love. We made a list of accounts, then a list of patterns, then a list of apologies we would likely never be asked to give. I canceled transfers, closed a card, sold a car we didn't need. In the quiet between tasks, I wrote Evelyn a letter. I did not send it. It wasn't a plea. Pleas are attempts to purchase forgiveness on credit. It was a record. I wrote what I had learned in words simple enough that even I could not misunderstand them. Love is not rescue. Help is not obligation. Fairness is not automatic. It is practiced. Respect must be paid in advance. Weeks passed. The city turned a corner toward spring, the kind you notice first in the air before the trees admit it. I passed the building on Pearl Heights once, from across the street. I didn't go in. I didn't linger. I looked up at the glass and thought about the blueprint Evelyn had chosen for her life. Clean lines, load-bearing boundaries, exits clearly marked. It was not a fortress against love. It was a fortress against extraction. One evening, Sarah asked if we had lost our daughter. I told her the truth. We had lost the right to call her ours. Rights, unlike titles, are earned and kept by conduct. We had spent years cashing them in. Clara called once more, late on a Tuesday. She wanted to know if I would co-sign a lease just for the first year. I told her no. She hung up without a word. I expected the old surge of guilt to follow, the reflex that makes a parent open a wallet as if unzipping a wound. It did not come. What came instead was a quiet grief, the kind that doesn't ask for witnesses. On a Sunday, I returned to the cafe on Alder alone. The barista remembered Evelyn and smiled when I ordered the same tea. I sat at the same table and placed a folded 20 where she had left hers. It wasn't a ritual. It wasn't an offering. It was a reminder to myself. Value exchanged without consent is theft, even when it is wrapped in the language of care. If anyone asks me now what happened to our family, I tell them nothing dramatic. No police. No courtrooms. No public scandal. Just a series of small, private decisions. The kind that feel reasonable when you make them and catastrophic when you add them together. We saved the child who cried louder and charged the bill to the child who didn't cry at all. Eventually, the quiet child learned to speak in documents instead of pleas. She built a structure where our signatures no longer mattered. I sometimes wonder what Evelyn felt walking out of that cafe. Relief? Sorrow? A clean space where anger might have been? I don't know. What I do know is this. She did not punish us. She protected herself. There is a difference, and recognizing it is the beginning of repentance. The last line of the last letter I never sent her says, "If you ever need us, we will come, but not to take, not to ask, not to weigh your worth against anyone else's. We will come as people who finally learned what a boundary is for." I don't know if I will ever have the right to mail it. Perhaps the learning is the only part that belongs to me. As for Clara, I wish her a life that requires no rescues. I wish her the pain that teaches without destroying, and the solitude that cures without hardening. I wish her an honest reckoning in a quiet room, and the courage to make a plan that does not begin with a phone call to her parents. If Evelyn ever reads this, I hope she recognizes her own architecture in it. The way she turned our collapsing house into a lesson about weight and load, about what can be asked of a structure and what must be refused. She didn't tear the family down. She declined to be the beam that breaks. I used to think fatherhood was the art of standing between your children and the world. Now I think it is the art of standing between your children and your own worst impulses. I failed at that art when it mattered most. That failure has a cost I will pay in quiet ways for the rest of my life. But responsibility is not a door that locks from the outside. It is a key you can still turn from within. So I keep turning it, one click at a time. No more lies, no more transfers, no more stories in which a daughter's strength is treated like a bank. When I fold a 20 now, I don't think of what it can buy. I think of a cup of tea, a steady gaze, and a voice telling me, with sorrow and precision, exactly where the boundary stands. Evelyn's departure was not a storm or a slammed door. It was a clinical excision, a steady hand removing infected tissue so the rest might have a chance to live. In the weeks that followed, the house sounded different, as if the rooms had learned to breathe more carefully, afraid of waking some sleeping creature. Sarah and I spoke in smaller sentences. We moved around each other like convalescents who had survived the same surgery, but were healing at separate speeds. I began to understand that grief has textures, one for what you lose, another for what you realize you never truly had, and a third for the illusions you fed until they grew teeth. We enrolled in counseling because silence had become too loud. Dr. Chen's office overlooked a narrow courtyard with a single maple that refused to drop its last leaf. Every week I watched that leaf hang on, stubborn and ordinary, and felt the pathetic kinship of a man who had confused endurance with wisdom. Dr. Chen did not punish or comfort us. She drew a small diagram on a legal pad and labeled one circle rescuers and another sacrificial lamb. She tapped the first circle. "You discovered a joint purpose," she said, "by nursing Clara's weakness. That purpose required a counterweight, someone whose competence could be taxed without limit. You did not choose the roles deliberately. You drifted into them because, for a long time, they stabilized the family story. But a story that demands one character bleed so another can breathe is not love. It is a coping mechanism with excellent PR. I wanted to argue, to defend the old slogans: family first, help the struggling, protect the fragile. Dr. Chen anticipated the reflex and let it die on the table between us. "Compassion without boundaries," she said, "teaches exploitation. Strength without recognition invites erasure. You did both at once, which is why your outcomes feel both inevitable and shocking." Sarah's fingers folded into the careful shape she uses when she's holding a teacup too hot for her hands. "So where do we start?" she asked. "You start," Dr. Chen said. by stopping. No more rescues purchased with someone else's dignity. No more morality plays with Clara cast as fragile and Evelyn cast as inexhaustible. You stop the machine. Then you measure what remains. News of Clara arrived the way trouble often does. Sideways, through someone else's life. An old neighbor, the kind who remembers the color of your first car and your second dog, left a message on our answering machine. The landlord had changed the locks. The boys were placed with a relative for a temporary period while the court sorted things out. There had been a hearing, then an order, then an admission to a treatment center that required the surrender of her phone and the acceptance of schedules that do not care about tears. I sat at the kitchen table and listened twice, not because I doubted the facts, but because I could not believe how calm the words sounded. The catastrophe had a filing system, and our daughter had been entered under a number. Pain can be narcotic or clarifying. This pain cleared the fog. I did not call Clara. Any conversation would only reset the old machinery, plead, rescue, resent, repeat. Instead, I called Marcus Reed. He answered on the second ring in the same even voice that had once pronounced the word fortress. I told him I did not want to contact Evelyn, and I did not want to interfere with any custody proceeding. I wanted to establish a vehicle, clean, narrow, and beyond my reach, whose only purpose would be to protect the boys' education and basic welfare in ways that could not be converted into excuses for their mother. Marcus listened without interruption. Then he said, "A welfare and education trust for minors, with independent trustees, disbursements restricted to tuition, books, health costs, and verified essentials, no cash equivalents, no parental control, and no beneficiary veto. Is that your intention?" I said yes. "Then it will be legal," he replied, "and it will be wise." We met once to sign the documents. The trust was named plainly and without sentiment. The Vance Grandsons' Welfare and Education Trust. I moved a significant sum into it. I relinquished the right to direct it, the right to be thanked for it, the right to gather reports that might let me pretend I was still the architect of anything. Marcus slid the final file across the conference table. "The trustees will handle distributions on evidence," he said. "They will not accept phone calls that begin with 'just this one time.' They will not forward messages." I thanked him and envied his clarity. A week later, an envelope arrived at our home with a single sentence on firm paper. "The trust has been established. An appropriate action." For the first time in months, I slept. I did not hear from Evelyn. That silence had matured from punishment into climate. It could no more be argued with than the weather. Then, in late spring, the city hosted a design exhibition at one of the refurbished warehouses by the river. I went because I needed to be among objects arranged by minds more orderly than my own. I walked the grid of booths with their measured lighting and quiet ambition. A small crowd gathered at a corner display where the materials seemed to glow from within. Wood that remembered trees, steel that looked like lines drawn with a slow pencil, textiles that suggested softness without begging for touch. I recognized the signature before I recognized the name. The placard read, "Evelyn Vance Studio." She was there, speaking with a cluster of clients and editors. Her voice, even from a distance, had the calm momentum of someone accustomed to finishing what she begins. Success clung to her like a perfume with no sweetness, just clarity, just edge, just light. I stood far enough away to be furniture. She looked up once, scanning the room as a speaker does to be certain her words are landing. Our eyes met for less than a second. Her expression did not shift. It was not contempt. It was inventory. A file retrieved, confirmed, and returned to the drawer. She turned back to her conversation without dishonesty or cruelty. I left before she finished her sentence. On the walk home, I understood that I no longer existed inside her emotional geography. I had become a boundary line she drew to save herself, a necessary caution printed in the margin of a map. Here be extraction, do not anchor. The recognition did not feel like a knife. It felt like a label finally affixed to the correct box. There is a relief reserved for properly named things. Dr. Chen called this stage functional grief. She said it arrives when the dramatic tears are done and the chores begin. The careful dismantling of bad habits, the inventory of what can be reused without harm, the decision to abandon sentimental junk. Sarah and I learned small disciplines. We stopped using the phrase, "for the sake of family," unless it could be followed by an action that harmed no one. We ended the liturgy of tiny lies. He's just overwhelmed. She's just sensitive. Next month will be better. We practiced sentences with subject and verb and boundary. I won't do that. I don't agree. That is not mine to carry. The sentences were heavy at first, then precise, then ordinary. Clara wrote 2 letters from the program. The first was an indictment. It accused us of betrayal, recited childhood grievances with footnotes, and asked for the trust's account number. I did not respond. Marcus had drafted the structure to survive the blast of need. The second letter arrived 6 weeks later. It did not ask for money. It described a group session in which each participant identified the person they most blamed, and then had to sit in a chair with that person's name on the back and speak as if they were them. "I could not pretend to be you," she wrote. "I do not know how to think like you." I read the sentence 3 times, not as flattery but as evidence. Some distances are progress. I wrote to Evelyn once without intention of sending. The letter had no petitions, no arguments, no demand for an audience. It contained facts I had learned too late and principles I had refused to practice when it would have cost me something. Love without respect burns the loved and the lover. Boundaries are not walls. They are doors with locks and schedules and reasons. Rescue is a transaction unless the rescued can say no. I folded the pages and put them in the drawer with the appliance manuals and warranties, the place where you keep proof that something can be fixed if you are willing to read. Sarah found her own rituals. She planted herbs on the kitchen sill because something small and green needed our patience more than our opinions. She called the boys on birthdays through the relative who had them and told them stories about how they once believed the moon followed our car at night because it liked us. She did not mention their mother's mistakes or ours. Children do not need footnotes to love. The house grew quiet in a way that was not emptiness. It was the quiet you hear in a gallery before the first visitor arrives, the air carefully balanced, the light chosen for mercy. I repaired the squeak in the 3rd stair and the drip in the upstairs sink. I learned the names of our new neighbors. I reread the old trust documents and found no loopholes. Not because I wanted one, but because I needed the assurance that this time I had built something that could not be used against the people it was meant to serve. When shame visited, as it still did, I made it tea and asked it what, precisely, it had come to teach. Shame that only accuses is theater. Shame that instructs is a tutor. I took notes. One afternoon in early summer, I was crossing the footbridge near the old cannery when I saw a child holding his father's hand and dragging his feet so he could watch the water longer. The father bent without impatience and waited for the boy to finish looking. It struck me that for years I had bent for the wrong reasons. Bent to appease, bent to avoid silence, bent to subsidize a habit and call it sacrifice. That man on the bridge bent to accompany wonder. Accompaniment is the cleanest form of love. Present, unintrusive, not afraid of what it cannot fix. If my life now has a ledger, it is written in small entries. I do not finance secrets. I do not pay ransoms to fear. I do not punish strength by taxing it. When the phone rings after midnight, I let it go to voicemail and listen in the morning with coffee and sunlight, two witnesses that make panic explain itself. If the message is a crisis without a plan, I do not supply one. If it is a plan without a boundary, I do not fund it. These are not commandments. They are the maintenance schedule of a man who allowed the engine to seize and intends never to do so again. Sometimes people ask whether I hope Evelyn will forgive us. Hope is the wrong verb. Forgiveness is a door only the owner may unlock. Standing on the porch with flowers is a way of feeling useful while remaining outside. I hope, instead, to deserve the distance she keeps, deserve the safety she built, deserve the possibility that one day our names will no longer carry the echo of invoices. If we meet again in a room not chosen by accident, I hope my first sentence will not be a negotiation disguised as love. I cannot romanticize the outcome. I lost my daughter, and I lost the right to claim that loss as tragedy inflicted by someone else. The freedom Evelyn owns was purchased at a price I made her pay. The fullest irony and the only honest legacy left to me is that the one true success I can claim as a father is having forced my daughter, by my failure, to become strong enough to need nothing I can give. She is free. That freedom grew from rubble I made. I hate that truth. I keep it polished. It is the only heirloom that teaches. On the day the maple in Dr. Chen's courtyard finally dropped its last leaf, I realized that our counseling had not changed the past. It had built a future that would not repeat it. Sarah and I walked home under a sky that had forgotten how to be dramatic. We cooked without speaking and ate without hurry. Later, she placed an old photograph on the table. Evelyn at 12, Clara at 12, the two of them holding a crooked kite between them, laughing at the wind as if it were a joke they had invented. We looked until the picture separated into paper and ink, until the spell of nostalgia released us from its suggestion that the present could be repaired by staring at the past long enough. Before bed, I opened the drawer with the unsent letter and the warranties. I added a single page with a single sentence written as clearly as I could manage. I will not ask love to do the work of my discipline. I folded it and closed the drawer. The next morning, the boys' trustee sent a brief note confirming a tuition payment to a summer reading program and a replacement pair of glasses. No adjectives, no commentary, no emotional markup. It was the finest prose I had read in a long time. Structure carrying care without spectacle. Money performing its modest job without pretending to be love. Every so often I pass the warehouse district at dusk and see the glow of studio windows like squares of quiet intention stitched into the city. I do not look for a particular room. I do not linger under a particular pane of glass. I walk, the way one walks through a museum that once displayed a masterpiece you adored and can no longer afford to see. Grateful it exists, chastened that you treated it as furniture, relieved that it lives where hands like yours cannot reach. If there is a benediction to all this, it is unsentimental. Love must be housed in structures that do not collapse under pleading. Help must be offered in forms that cannot be laundered into harm. Pride must learn to bow to facts drawn up by people who do not care about your excuses. And when you finally understand that your daughter's boundary saved her life, you stop calling it distance and start calling it the map. Evelyn's absence is no longer a wound. It is a scar I check with clean fingers. Clara's story is no longer a cliff. It is a road with signs I can read. Sarah's quiet is no longer fear. It is air that has learned to move through rooms without breaking anything. And I, who once thought fatherhood meant standing between my children and the world, now practice the smaller art of standing between my children and my own faults. It is not noble. It is maintenance. It is enough. On some evenings, when the light fades in such a way that the edges of the furniture seem to draw themselves, I take a $20 bill from my wallet and fold it the way Evelyn folded hers on that cafe table. I do not place it on an altar. I do not tip the past. I carry it in my pocket like a reminder with weight. Value exchanged without consent is theft. Respect prepaid is safety. And freedom, hers, theirs, ours, remains the only inheritance that cannot be squandered once you learn how to guard it. And I would love to hear your opinion, so please share it with me in the comments. I'm always curious about what you all think, and also write me where you heard this story. For more life stories like this, like the video and subscribe to my channel. There are many other stories waiting for you. With heartfelt greetings. Until next time.